And then I'll ask you to state your name and then spell your name for the court report.
David Diamond, D-A-V-I-D, D-I-A-M-O-N-D.
Thank you, sir. Counsel?
Dr. Diamond, are you a neuroscientist and professor at the University of South Florida?
That's correct.
How long have you been a neuroscientist?
I've been a neuroscientist now for about 40 years.
How long have you taught at the University of South Florida?
I've taught at USF for about 25 years.
In earlier testimony, you CV, is that correct?
That's correct.
And that CV is still accurate, correct?
Correct.
What would you define your field of study as?
Globally as the area of cognitive neuroscience.
And how would you describe that in layman's terms?
That's the understanding of how the brain processes information.
Have you ever done any research in the field of memory, prospective memory, or prospective memory failures?
So I've been studying memory all of my career, and in the past 20 years, I've focused on the brain and prospective memory.
Is prospective memory and prospective memory failures, are those widely studied in the scientific community?
Yes, that's correct.
How long have they been studied approximately?
Oh, quite a few, multiple decades.
So you study the brain and how the brain processes memory, is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you tell me what parts of the brain are involved in memory, prospective memory, and prospective memory failures?
So there are two primary areas of the brain involved in prospective memory. The first is we make a plan to do something in the future. So prospective memory is to remember to do something in the future. So you make that plan using your frontal cortex. You use your hippocampus, which is our primary memory structure, to form that memory of what you plan in the future, and then to actually have that memory occur, to reactivate. And so you need for your hippocampus to be active at just the right time for when you're planning to do whatever it is in the future.
Is there any other brain structure involved in prospective memory or their failures?
Well, we have another brain structure called the basal ganglia. And the basal ganglia can interact with the hippocampus and frontal cortex and can compete with the hippocampus frontal cortex. The basal ganglia has us do something automatically. And so if we're always, for example, driving from home to work, it's our basal ganglia that allows us to do that almost without thinking about it.
Is that also something associated with habit memory?
Right. So the basal ganglia underlies habit memory, what we call muscle memory, being able to do something automatically without thinking about it.
Do these brain structures normally interact with each other on a daily basis?
Well, these brain structures can be quite compatible, allowing us to do things automatically, the basal ganglia, allowing us to remember information, the hippocampus, and plan for the future. But when we're talking about prospective memory, we've got the frontal cortex and hippocampus have a plan. But the basal ganglia can override that plan, and it can have us do something out of habit, which then causes a prospective memory failure.
Are prospective memory failures common?
It's one of the most common forms of memory failures. It's prospective memory.
And you indicated you've spent at least 20 years researching this area, correct?
That's correct.
Would you be able to provide testimony to a jury about how the brain functions, how prospective memory works, and how the failures thereof occur?
Yes, I would be able to talk about the different brain structures, how they interact, how they enable prospective memory to occur successfully, but also how it can fail.
You've testified before in cases involving memory, prospective memory, and those failures, correct?
That's correct.
You've also consulted before in cases involving those things as well.
That's correct.
You've consulted for both the defense and the prosecution in different cases, correct?
I've advised both defense and the prosecution.
You prepared a PowerPoint presentation in this case, is that correct?
Yes.
Would that PowerPoint presentation assist you in explaining your testimony to a trier of fact?
I think it would provide a constructive visual aid.
Dr. Diamond, do you know how many other people are studying the area of prospective memory in those failures?
Oh, this is a very widely studied area. There must be hundreds, maybe thousands of other scientists studying prospective memory.
As far as the research that has gone into prospective memory in those failures, are there numerous articles written by experts in your field about that issue?
Certainly, articles have been written over decades about this phenomenon.
Now, in this case, you would be testifying about prospective memory failure as it relates to a child who died in a hot car. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is the field of prospective memory failures as it relates to children in hot cars, is that a specific field or just applying prospective memory analysis in the field of study to factual situations involving children dying in hot cars?
So prospective memory covers a broad range of different kinds of memory failures. Children being forgotten in cars is one category of prospective memory.
Have you published on prospective memory and its failures, generally speaking, over the years?
Yes, I have an online article which has over 100,000 views, specifically about the brain and prospective memory failures. And I published in a peer-reviewed medical journal on the neurobiology and neuropsychology of prospective memory failures.
Have you published anything about prospective memory failures in relationship to hot car child deaths?
Yes, specifically, my peer-reviewed medical journal paper addressed children dying in hot cars.
I think last time you testified at a hearing, I think we introduced that document. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that's been peer-reviewed, correct?
Correct.
Has your work in the area of prospective memory failures and those failures as it relates to hot car child deaths been, cited in other experts' work?
Yes, I've seen that. It's been viewed hundreds of times. It's specifically been cited in quite a few journals addressing both the issue of children forgotten in cars as well as the science of children forgotten in cars.
And these journals, if you broadly describe, are journals in the field of memory, prospective memory?
Yes, these are journals in the field of psychology as well as neuroscience. I wonder if I might get some water.
Turn that. Dr. Diamond, I'm going to ask you to turn around and look at a slide from your PowerPoint. All right. Give you a minute. Can you see the top of it, or there you go.
Just may I clarify? I received a couple of different PowerPoints. The last one I said corrected, so can we just confirm what PowerPoint it is? And I just want to make sure I have the same copy.
I sent Mr. Caldo the corrected one this morning. You should have it.
The last one?
The last one, yes. Dr. Diamond, can you tell me what that slide is from your PowerPoint?
So this is a publication, as you can see how long prospective memory has been studied, from over 20 years ago, in which these scientists are interested in how rapidly prospective memory can fail. And so these subjects are brought into a laboratory under controlled conditions, and they're given a task, which is to do something such as mental arithmetic. And then they're shown a cue. When they see that cue, they have to remember it. And at the end of performing their task, which is only 40 seconds later, They just need to hit a key on the keyboard. So the idea in prospective memory is you have to do something in the future. You have to remember to do something in the future. And under the control condition, which is the open bar, these people remember it 90% of the time. That's what that 0.9 is. Now, what they've also done with these people is on a subset of trials, they've added a distraction. Briefly, they need to do something else during that 40-second period. And then they ask, do you remember, after seeing that red mark, do they remember to hit the key on the keyboard? And that's the lower bar. That's the one with the diagonal lines. It shows significantly reduced incidents in which people remembered to hit the key on the keyboard. And the really important point about this paper is that it shows a very brief distraction causes people to have a PM failure, prospective memory failure, that is now down to only 60% accurate.
Is this an example of testing that's done on prospective memory and failures of prospective memory, correct?
That's correct. This is just one of many papers that have tested prospective memory and its failure. The emphasis here is how rapidly people forget what was in their plan.
This is one example of the testing that's been done regarding prospective memory and its failures, correct?
That's correct.
Just a moment. Judge, at this point, I've asked the court to reconsider its decision not to allow Dr. Diamond to testify in this case. We'd ask the court to.
Well, does the state first wish to make any inquiry of the doctor?
Judge, I'll ask a few inquiries.
You want to give me? Oh,
I can ask them.
okay.
On your PowerPoint slide, if we can go to the first page. The title there, can you just read the title of your PowerPoint presentation?
Neuropsychological perspective of how it is possible to forget a child in a car in relation to state of Florida versus Rhonda Jewell.
And it's safe to say that the title of your presentation is the bulk of the sum and substance of what you were testifying to. Is that fair to say?
That's correct.
Okay. If we can go to the last slide. And it would be your intention to testify to the items that are in your slide and present them to the jury?
Well, as a scientist, I like to summarize my work. My intention would only be what would be permitted in the court.
Fair. Can you go ahead and read the last paragraph on the last page?
Like other loving and attentive parents and caretakers, Rhonda Jewell unintentionally and unknowingly lost awareness of Ariya in her car.
And it's fair to say that that would be potentially within the scope of your testimony today at trial. Is that fair to say?
That's correct.
In preparation for today, are you at all familiar with Dr. Cahill's testimony in this case?
I was not here while he gave testimony.
Were you, did you get a copy of his prior deposition?
Yes, I did.
And are you familiar with that deposition?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And same thing with this hearing. Are you familiar with what he testified to in general at his hearing?
I received one document, which may very well have been his hearing.
Which may have been a transcript from the hearing?
Yes.
Okay. Are you familiar that he testified? Okay, I thought Your Honor said something plausible. To me means that I cannot say with any confidence whether or not leaving Ariya Paige in the car was because of prospective memory error. Are you aware that that's his testimony?
Yes.
Okay, and do you agree with that testimony?
Well, as a scientist, one has to be open to any possibility, no matter how unlikely.
Okay. So if I asked you to whether or not you disagree with that statement, what would your response be?
Based on my interview with Rhonda Jewell, and what I read about her from other depositions, I would disagree with him that she committed this act intentionally.
Mr. Judge.
We renew our request, Judge.
I've heard your argument. Any argument?
Just we rely on all of our prior motions, arguments, everything else we raised, and now it's duplicative.
Okay, well, with due respect to Dr. Diamond, I'm going to continue to exclude his testimony for the reasons that were set forth in the written order that was entered sometime back in September, and for the further reason that the court has allowed the testimony of Dr. Cahill, who also is an expert in the field of prospective memory. So,
Judge, I'd just like to perfect the record a few more minutes if I can. I'd like to perfect the record a few more minutes with some more testimony, just for the record.
what I don't see any need for it, but if you want to do it, yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Dr. Diamond, in this particular case, you had a chance to look at the facts of this case. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, in general, can perfective memory have catastrophic effects?
Yes, it can.
Have there been studies of airlines and other things that would indicate that?
That's correct. Planes crash as a result of prospective memory failures.
Do you, in your field of study, use surveys to help analyze prospective memory and failures of prospective memory?
Yes, I do.
What is a survey, generally speaking?
So in a survey, you're looking for a representative group of people. You can ask them questions that can provide some insight to understand a phenomenon.
Can I approach the witness, Judge?
Any questions? Okay. Can Dr. Diamond be excused? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought you were through.
Dr. Diamond, I'm going to show you a document that's been launched in the education. Tell me if you recognize what that is.
Yes, I recognize this. This is a survey of over 1,000 parents with young children.
Is it also caregivers?
These are also caregivers, yes.
Caregivers that's distinguished from parents.
That's right, parents and caregivers, all of whom transport children 6 and under.
Can you generally just give me an overview of what that survey says?
As far as to me, the most important feature of this survey is that they found that almost all, 88% of these people said that they can't imagine that they would never leave and forget a child in a car.
Is that something that experts like yourself rely upon in having opinions about cases?
Yes, I find that information very useful.
And surveys are a common way to gather information in your field, correct?
That's correct.
I'd like to move this into defense number 2.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Then it will be received as Defense Exhibit 2 for the proffer purpose.
Judge, just want to be 1,000% sure that doesn't end up back in the jury room.
Right, by all means.
Doctor, can you give us an example of how habitual memory action can override conscious intentions?
Well, we have these kind of experiences on a regular basis. You have the intention of, well, first you have a normal drive home from work. And on a particular drive, you have a plan to stop at the pharmacy to pick up some important medication. So that's now a prospective memory. On your drive, you follow the route that you have gone hundreds, maybe thousands of times, and you drive right past the pharmacy, you end up at home. The failure to remember the plan to stop at the pharmacy is a failure of prospective memory. That is when your habit memory overrides your prospective memory. That is when your basal ganglia, the brain structure that controls habit memory, overrides the hippocampus, which has the responsibility to remind you to stop at the pharmacy.
In the PowerPoint presentation that you would have used had you testified in this case, you have slides, explanations of these kind of things, correct?
Correct.
There are also some studies in your slides regarding the number of children left in cars, correct?
That's correct.
And that's done by the Pediatric Association.
Well, it's done through a few different organizations, kidsincars.org, noheatstroke.org, as well as newer organizations that maintain a database of the number of children that die in hot cars.
Again, these are things that you use in your field of study, correct?
That's correct.
One particular study from 2024 from the Traffic Injury Prevention Coalition, they talk about what they refer to as PVH, which is pediatric vehicular heat stroke. That's the same thing as a child dying in a hot car, correct?
Correct.
Do you recall what they found in that study?
Well, what they found is that approximately an average of about 30 to 40 children per year die of heat stroke as a result of being forgotten in cars over the past 25 years.
Do they discuss in this article how that occurs?
Well, they use my research to discuss how that occurs, specifically citing my research with an entire paragraph covering my research.
This is the research that you documented in your article that was introduced several months ago in a hearing, correct?
Right. They cited my peer-reviewed publication with an extensive discussion of my findings to explain how it is that prospective memory fails, specifically with children forgotten in cars.
First slide, where you can see Rhonda Jewell. Dr. Diamond, in this case, you came to a conclusion about what you believe happened in this case. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What information did you have prior to making that conclusion?
I interviewed Mrs. Jewell. I watched the video of her when she was being questioned. I also read depositions. I read the police report to come to my conclusion.
So what's your understanding of what occurred in this case that would have caused a prospective memory failure for Mrs. Rhonda Jewell?
So Mrs. Jewell had a habit, her routine for several months was to go straight to Stacy Paschal's house. From her house to Stacy Paschal's house, take care of her children. That routine changed.
I'm going to ask you to look behind you here. We're going to pull up a slide here from your PowerPoint. The slide that's currently on the screen, could you tell us what that is?
So this is a visual that I use to help to understand someone's habitual performance, their habit memory. So what you have here is the route that Miss Jewell took from her home to Stacy Paschal's home, which she followed for several months. So So this became part of her habit memory.
And that's the basal ganglia, correct?
And this is ultimately controlled by the basal ganglia, which allows you, again, to go on a route without thinking about it. And it's this motor memory that we talk about.
And the next slide we're going to show you, can you tell us what that is?
So things changed. When in June, she picked up Ariya on the way to Stacy Paschal's home, which ended up actually on the same street, 6th Street. So she's now changed her route for a relatively short period of time for a few weeks. So she now has a new route to follow, which overlaps with the old route.
And the next slide that we have.
So things now changed on the week of July 12th. And now it's become different almost every day. So on July 12th, Ms. Jewell did not go to Stacy Paschal's house. She picked up Ariya and then returned to her home where she watched Ariya. So she's now got a different route.
And the next slide that we have.
Now we're back to the routine route. That's July 13th. She's once again back to the route that she followed for months because Ariya was not available to her that day. So on that day, she did not take care of Ariya. She went straight to Stacy Paschal's house, reactivating that old habitual memory.
And the next slide that we have, Doctor.
Things have now changed again. On the following Monday, she has now picked up Ariya and has not gone to Stacy Paschal's house. She's gone to a friend's house where she has now watched Ariya for the day.
And the next slide that we have.
So on Wednesday, July 19th, we're now back to Mrs. Jewell picking up Ariya with the plan then to bring her to Stacy Paschal's house. During that drive, there was a good bit going on. It was a rather stressful morning. She had planned on going to Burger King. She was in a bit of a hurry. And as she then left the Burger King, as she reported to me, she lost awareness of Ariya in the car. So she then gets back on 6th Street and goes to Stacy Paschal's house.
And the next slide that you have.
This illustrates that in the process, now as she's driving on 6th Street, coming to Stacy Paschal's house, that component of the slide that included Ariya has faded. It has now faded from her memory. She arrived at Stacy Paschal's house, no longer being aware of Ariya in the car. And so when she exited the car, she had lost awareness of Ariya.
You use your phrase here, unknowingly and unintentionally, on the slide behind you. What do you mean by that?
So we distinguish intentional acts from unintentional acts without knowledge. So at the moment, we can query what is going on with Rhonda Jewell. Is she aware of Ariya in the car? The answer is no. Is she intending to leave her in the car? The answer is no. So it is an unknowing and unintentional act to leave this child in the car.
When you say lost awareness, are you saying that she forgot that Ariya was in the car?
Yes, she did forget that Ariya was in the car. The addition of talking about awareness helps to explain why she forgot.
And so the events that you've described just in the last few moments, are those things that have occurred in your research to other individuals, this loss of awareness?
Yes, I personally have handled dozens of cases in which children have died in hot cars. And there is such a consistent pattern in which the parent or caretaker has had a routine drive that does not include the child. And so at the time in which they have gone to their destination, to them, this is a drive that does not include the child. They have lost awareness of the child. This is what every parent, and I'm talking about dozens of parents and caretakers, have reported to me. They thought they were on a routine drive. And as far as the child, they had lost awareness of the child. So when they exited the car, they were not aware the child was in the car.
A couple last things really quick. I haven't shown you the entire slide, PowerPoint, excuse me, but you've reviewed that, correct?
The entire PowerPoint?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I mean, you produced it.
Yes.
I've shown you some. Are those accurate from your PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
And the flash drive that you gave me that contained that would contain the entire PowerPoint presentation you wanted to present if you testified in this case. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Because we're going to ask the court to let me move into evidence for purposes of proffer the PowerPoint presentation.
Any objection?
Again, same, just, yeah, as long as they're not going back there.
I will go ahead and receive it as Defendant's Exhibit 3 for proffer purposes only.
And the last thing, Dr. Diamond, if you were to testify in this case, would you testify that in your expert opinion that Rhonda Jewell lost awareness or forgot that Ariya was in the car by the time she arrived at Stacey Paschal's home?
Yes, I would testify to that.
I have no other questions, Your Honor.
Okay, the state has indicated it has no questions of Dr. Diamond. Can he be excused at this point?
Yes, sir. We're going to ask the court to reconsider and have him testify.
Same ruling at this
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Diamond, you are excused. Thank you, sir. Got everything?